All right. Welcome, everybody, to Charlotte Kaye talking about decluttering. And I'm so excited, Charlotte, to ask you lots of questions about decluttering in older adults specifically. But first, if you want to do an introduction to who you are and the work that you do, anyone, if you have questions at any point, feel free to drop it in the chat. Feel free to raise your hand. I'll give you a quick, actually, before Charlotte, before you do your introduction, I'm going to give a quick tutorial of Google Meet for those who are new in this space. Along the bottom of your screen, you should have a turn microphone on and off, turn camera on and off. The CC is live closed captioning. If you turn that on, it's just for you to see, not necessarily everybody to see. There's a hand raised, so if you do have a question and you want to ask it with your voice instead of typing it out, you can raise your hand. And then there is a more options button that is a 3 dots. If you click that and click settings, you can adjust your microphone and your camera and all of that. Looking over to the bottom right, you can click on the people to see who else is here. And you can click on the little conversation box to type a question in the chat. All right, Charlotte, tell us a little bit more about you and the work that you do.
Yeah, so my name is Charlotte Myers. I go by Charlotte Kaye usually in my business, but I am a coach of all kinds. I'm a life coach, a women's empowerment coach, but specifically today we'll focus on my decluttering coaching services. And because I think most folks are local, yes? No, all over. Okay.
We're spread out all over. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So I do online decluttering coaching as well as in person. The in person is kind of Michigan based, but other than that, I do have services that go all over as well. And this whole journey sort of started for me really in, I want to say like back in 2015. I read The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up by Marie Kondo, really ingrained a lot of those practices into myself, and then just sort of ran out of things to get rid of in my life. So I started helping friends and family. And then when I started my business a few years ago at this point, I just love helping people to declutter and organize and to just really free themselves of the things that they don't actually need, which has a huge impact on mental health and well-being as well. And so, yeah, I've been doing that ever since. And I'm one of those weirdos that is like, oh my God, a messy basement, please let me help you with that. So I think most people just get really overwhelmed by it, but it's honestly one of my favorite things to do in the world.
So have you worked with any older adult clients like 50 and up?
Yeah, I have.
What has there been any patterns, like as you walk into their homes, like things that they tend to have or tend that they should be getting rid of?
Yeah, I think, well, one thing that I think goes into the mindset, especially around stuff, is often those folks like parents went through the Great Depression. And so they, experienced a time where they literally lost potentially everything. So every little thing was really precious. And I think that mentality can sometimes get passed down, right, to kind of that more baby boomer generation. So I definitely see that. I also, what I tend to see is just people that have lived in the same home for a really long time, maybe 20 years, right? Maybe 30 years. And that just requires a process to look through all of that stuff and often requires assistance, right?
What's been something that was hard for someone to get rid of?
Oh my gosh. I mean, it's really individual to the person. Let me think of a specific example. So, for example, I helped someone do their basement and kind of their like craft room. And I'm like also a crafter, and it's all these, and I would say crafting is an example of a category that is, you know, things that we think we should do, or that we might one day want to do, or that we used to really love to do, but maybe not anymore. So then they just become like these, black holes of yarn or or puzzles or, you know, skiing equipment or whatever it is, things that maybe were a part of someone's life at one point. Because I think you know, you find a new hobby and you get really excited about it, and you just like get so excited that you just like get all the stuff for it, and then maybe it doesn't remain part of your life forever. And so it's the part of like shedding that identity of who you once were or who you thought you should be to really come into like who you are in this moment, right? And I could imagine too, right, for older folks, it might be things they just aren't able to do anymore. Like I think about my grandmother, she had macular degeneration, so she couldn't see very well. And so to keep things like books just didn't really make sense for her anymore because she couldn't read them. So, you know, that's something that comes up.
So you mentioned doing this decluttering service virtually. How have you pivoted to doing this service virtually?
Yeah, so that totally came as part of the pandemic, right? And honestly, I just kind of put the decluttering part of my business to the side when the pandemic happened and really focused on my other coaching services because I didn't know how to translate it into virtual because, you know, you can sit on a Zoom and declutter with someone. I did do that once, but it's just not the same. Like when I'm in someone's home, I can help them move things and reorganize things and back things up and like do all of that stuff. And when you're just like on something like this with someone, that doesn't quite work out. But I remember, I think I was having a conversation with a friend and we use an app called Marco Polo. And that's just like a video chat app where basically you don't have to schedule to be at the same time. You can just leave someone a video message that they can either watch live as you're leaving it or they can watch it later. And so I had a friend who we weren't, I think at that point, maybe we weren't seeing each other because of the pandemic. And so I was like, as you're going through stuff, like take a video, like show me what she was going through her closet. And I was like, oh my God, just like show me. Or if you have questions, just let me know. And I was like, wait a second, like this could totally work for people in terms of they can show me their space. I can give them one-on-one specific advice for like where to start, you know, what to put where, like all of that kind of stuff. And it doesn't have to be like this weird scheduled time where we're like sitting together for a couple of hours on a Zoom, right? So that's how I've been doing my virtual decluttering service. And it's been working really well because it's also nice for folks that just like when they have time, right? And when they want to work on it, as opposed to like just scheduling one day. And the way that one works is like a subscription. So you can do it for 1 month or 3 months or however many and just use it as you need it.
You have people over 50 doing Marco Polo with you?
Yes, I have. Yeah. It definitely depends, right? I think I will admit I had one person who that technology just didn't really work. Like she wasn't even really texting much. Like she was like old school, like let's call each other. So we tried it and it just didn't work out for her. So I think that's always something we can try beforehand just to make sure, you know, I try to make it as easy as possible. Like, you know, they give me their phone number when they sign up. Here's the link to download the app. And then I send them, you know, a video on there to and kind of explain like you did, right, with Google Meets, like kind of an orientation to what it is. But it is pretty simple for those that do use, you know, technology. And I will say, like, I don't know, it's kind of an age thing, but kind of not an age thing because like I know a 95-year-old who's better on email than I am. And like, so I think it just depends, you know, if the person's not super tech savvy and they only use their phone to make phone calls, like maybe not. But if they're using social media on their phone at all, I would say it's just as simple as that, if not more simple.
When you go into somebody's home, what is often the first thing that you do?
Yeah. So I always recommend starting with, honestly, your clothes, but I've sort of created this like choose your own adventure, like your clothes, your home office, or your kitchen, right? Home office might not be as prevalent for your population if most are retired and not doing, some kind of other project. But I think starting with those spaces, there are things that you're maybe not so attached to. It depends, right? Some people might be attached to their clothes, but a lot of people aren't as attached to clothes as like, we don't start with like sentimental stuff. Like I don't recommend starting with a basement, right? Or like starting with something that's like all those memories, right? Let's start with clothes, something that you use every day so you can see the difference. You can start to, build your muscle for making decisions, because I really facilitate an intuitive based model for making decisions. I have no hard and fast rules about what you should keep or what you should get rid of. I ask, what do you want this space or your wardrobe or whatever to feel like? Like, how do you want to feel when you walk in? And we weigh everything against that. So I just helped someone with their home office, and she said, I want to feel calm and peaceful and like productive in my office. And so as we were going through, we sort of, when a difficult decision came up, it was like, okay, does this add or detract from that goal of like peace, right? Because it's calm and peaceful to be able to open your drawer and know exactly where things are, right? If there's a million things and everything's falling all over the place, that's not very peaceful. That can induce stress, right? So that's usually where I start.
What is your favorite room to do in someone's home?
I love doing closets. I love doing a wardrobe because there's usually like interesting things in there, but also I just think it's something that impact, I also, in my life coaching, I focus a lot on like empowerment and confidence. And I think your clothes can make such a difference for that, especially, I work with mostly women in my other coaching, right? Especially for women around, not that men can't also, but like body image and feeling good in your clothes and like walking into your closet and seeing things that all fit and all make you feel good, right? I think that's just a huge difference for folks. And it's just like this nice, concise sort of thing. Like you could do a whole office and you'll have all different kinds of items, right? But with a wardrobe, like it's your clothes. So I always love starting with clothes, and I always love helping people with that. I will say I have different tactics too. So like, for example, my mom really loves clothes. She has an entire room, like her upstairs basically is dedicated. It's like her closet. It's huge. And she did not want to get rid of anything, and that's fine. It's a little bit different when you work with a family or a friend, because when someone hires me, they're like ready, right? So this was a little more like, let's just play around. So what we did was we didn't get rid of anything, but I asked her like, pick something that feels really good to you, that you love wearing, that makes you feel happy. And so she picked one thing, and I was like, okay, now pick out the rest of the items that make you feel that way. So we ended up with like a capsule wardrobe, like a smaller version of her wardrobe. And I was like, just play with this for a while. Like just wear stuff from this for a few weeks and just see how it goes, right? Because when you have that kind of higher caliber of like all the things you really, really love, whether it's clothes or whether it's, decor items or furniture, like it just adds more joy to your life. And you really do. It makes a difference every single day, especially now when we're home so much. And then, obviously there are retired folks that are out and about all the time, but also I would assume older folks, retired folks, they're spending more time at home. So you want to make it a reflection of you, and you want to make it like your sanctuary, right? Like we have enough stress in our life, like our home and our things shouldn't be stressing us out.
What is the biggest physical transformation that you have seen in a home that you've worked with?
Oh my God. I mean, they're all really good. Like I post before and afters on my Instagram, and they're so great. I will say the biggest are usually when I do basements, to be honest, because what is kind of nice about basements is usually it's stuff that people haven't looked at in a million years, which does make it easier to get rid of when you don't have that attachment to seeing it every day. Like I was just talking to a couple friends who still have some things in like their parents' houses, and they were like, well, I can't move it to my new house because I don't have storage. I'm like, honestly, if you go look through those boxes, you will probably get rid of most of it because you haven't used it in so long. You haven't even seen it. You might not even remember why you kept it, right? Like that emotional attachment can really decrease when you don't see the stuff every day and when you haven't seen it for a while. So that's why, like, I always recommend just like getting ready and making decisions and sticking to those decisions. But if that's really challenging for someone, I'll be like, okay, let's the things you think you want to get rid of, let's box it all up for a month and then go look at it again. And you likely will not have missed anything from it.
What's been the biggest emotional transformation or like personal transformation that you've seen?
Yeah. Oh, that's okay. I mean, it always is emotional. Like folks always feel lighter and happier after, and sometimes very tired, right? Like in the actual process, but it's like an investment of energy to gain back energy in the future. Oh, I had one, and where did it go? So I helped a friend, woman, colleague, client do her home office because, you know, as the pandemic happened, her basement became her home office, right? And so she had a lot of things to let go of. And, you know, she had had some people pass away in her family over the year. And one of them was her brother, and she had to handle her brother's entire estate. And so I think just seeing someone really realize what's most important, she was able to be like, no, I'm just getting rid of these things because I don't want someone in my family to have to deal with this later, right? Like these things aren't what's important. Like, you know, your actual relationships are what's important, right? And so she was like very decisive and like very cutthroat and just like I think she had her wedding bouquet. And I, you know, there's some things where I anticipate like, okay, this might be a conversation, right? This might be, and I would never make someone get rid of anything. But you know, it's so funny to me when I kind of gear up for like, okay, this might be more difficult. And then she was just like, I was like, what are these? And she's like, oh, it's my wedding bouquet. And she was like, and she just threw it away. Which was super great. And some people would want to keep that, right? And like they would cherish it forever. And that's fine too. But it was just like really funny to see, you know, that shift in perspective that happens. And I think it's just, you know, there's always this sense of more peace and more calm because we don't realize how much, you know, clutter lives in our minds as well as in our physical spaces. Like it really does weigh us down, even if we don't realize it, which is why, you know, probably if anyone listening, you can, you know, comment on this in the chat. But if you've ever gone through stuff and you got rid of things and then you feel physically lighter, I don't know if that's happened. It happens to me every time I declutter. It happens to my clients when they declutter, but like we didn't lose weight. Like it doesn't really make sense, you know, that would happen if there wasn't this, you know, I call it like energetic weight that exists when we have things that we don't use or love or reflect who we are right in this current moment.
Do people ever, so you talk about like people feeling tired or like weighed down, do they get discouraged partway through your work together?
So yes, sometimes we have to take a break. Which I'm always sort of checking in, like, because people just have different capacity for how some people like get into it. They're like, let's go. And they want to go for like 8 hours. Some people after a couple of hours sort of they're like, oh, I'm getting overwhelmed. And so then we just sort of like take a break. But I also, you know, especially when it comes to in-person is I try to make it so that I don't leave people in the messy middle because it always gets worse before it gets better. Any transition really in life is that way. But when you're decluttering a space, like you have to like take everything out and like go through it and it ends up looking terrible to begin with, right? And so that's why when I do my in-person sessions, especially, I do half a day and I make sure we do a space that we can complete in half a day because I don't ever want to leave someone in that messy middle. Like I want to be able to say, okay, yes, it's going to be terrible to begin with, but by the time I leave, it's going to be done. And the stuff's going to be out of your house. I take as many of the donations as I can fit in my car. Like, it's going to be out of your house. Everything's going to be back organized. Cause that's also, where I really come in a lot. I facilitate the decluttering, but then my brain is hyper organized and likes to create systems that really are going to work for people. So that's the part where I can just come in and be like, does this make sense here? Cool. Boom, 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 boom. And I just like put it all back, right? As opposed to the decision-making part, which is where I support, right? But it's not up to me how long that part takes.
So you mentioned taking the donations. What do you do with all the stuff people don't want anymore?
Yeah, so a big concern for people is they don't want things going to the landfill, right? So you can ask me a follow-up question about selling stuff if you want, but I try to put as little in the landfill as possible. So highest priority is donating, and then recycling. And then, if something does need to go to the trash, it's an item that will eventually go to the trash anyway. So we just kind of learn from that in terms of like making purchases in the future. But that's sort of my hierarchy of how I do things. And then occasionally people will have like specific, like, oh, my kid's Boy Scout troop takes this once a year, so I'm going to donate to them. So, I personally like to take towels to the Humane Society, right? So if someone has a specific like kind of nonprofit or philanthropy that they want to support with their donations, we'll do that as well. That I might have them do because I don't know everyone who takes donations, but that tends to be, if we're keeping it really simple, it's donation, recycling, trash. And then if they have other wishes in terms of where their items are going to go, then we do that too.
You mentioned that sometimes you do sell their things. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Oh, no, I don't sell their things. I just have thoughts on whether or not selling things is worth it. What I always, unless you're a person who like every year you have a regular garage sale that you actively participate in and you actually sell stuff, I always recommend donating as much as possible, because if you don't get it out, like, it's still kind of weighing on you. So that's like always a balance I try to strike. And then what I recommend too is like determine like how much it's worth to you to sell something. So like for me, if it's like a piece of furniture that I can maybe get like $100 for, that's kind of where I go. Like, I'm not going to spend time selling, clothing items for $5 and $10 on Facebook Marketplace. Like, that is not worth it. Like, I don't find joy in that. That's not worth the time for me, right? So that's where I always recommend, because if it turns into like, oh, well, I should sell that one day, then it's still weighing on you. It's still this thing that you're going to feel guilt about potentially. And we're trying to like alleviate all of that.
I like that a lot. Have you ever used the Buy Nothing group?
Yeah, I love the Buy Nothing group. Yeah, so I will do that. I do that more for myself than for clients, because it can take more work and time. But Buy Nothing. So for example, if there are some things that like the thrift store wouldn't take, I'll do Buy Nothing. And so that's they're Facebook groups. Not every city has them, but a lot of cities do. So you can search on Facebook, Buy Nothing, and your city. And then you just basically post things on there for your neighbors. It's very localized. And so, for example, like most thrift stores don't take like open puzzles, right? Because they want to make sure that I like puzzles. So I have puzzles. That's why I know that example. So I have like a little stack of puzzles that I will eventually put onto there. I've also done like, even like, the paint sample from, Home Depot or wherever, when you're going to paint a room, you get paint samples. I'll put those on Buy Nothing, because like maybe for kids, like art projects or whatever, and people have taken those. So yeah, there are other options kind of between the donate, recycle, and like trash, right? Because there are some items where like maybe, donations won't take them, but someone else would. Or, I have a friend, colleague of mine who does what do they do like crafting projects, and they'll take like any kind of fabric. Like it doesn't matter if it's like ripped or a remnant or whatever. So like that's another way you can, and there's different fabric recycling sort of things. You'd have to do research in your own area to see what's available. But yeah, so there are lots of options because there are lots of people who really care about not putting things in landfills. So, you know, if that's important to you, you can really start to look more into those as well.
Have you helped people get ready to downsize their home?
I specifically helped with downsizing. I don't think I have specifically for like someone who was moving to a smaller thing, but that certainly is a wonderful time, right? Like it would be the same process. I am looking into, I have a friend who's moving soon. And so I'm looking into helping her. She is local with packing and then unpacking, right? When she gets to the new, you know, when she gets to the new house, because I think that's the most can be really stressful is like you've moved all this stuff and then you just want to like have your home, but then you have to actually like unpack and organize and decide where things should go. So that's something that I'm going to do. But I also recommend, I was talking to a real estate agent. You know, I connect with a lot of real estate agents because moving is just a great time to declutter. And she was like, well, I don't have any people who are downsizing right now. And I was like, well, it doesn't, if they're just moving, like that would be great. But the process is literally the same. I mean, I usually end up, my favorite thing is when we get rid of enough stuff to be able to get rid of like pieces of furniture. Like, you know, I did that woman's basement home office who I was talking about earlier who had her brother pass away, and we got rid of like 2 giant bookshelves. And so, you know, whether you're just decluttering for you or you're downsizing, right? It's the same process. The intention might be different. Like sometimes it's like, you know, would I move this, right? Is this worth it to move? Like that could be a question that comes up as we go through things. Or, you know, do you want to still have like kind of spaciousness and airiness in your new home and you're going to be in a much smaller home? Okay, well, let's focus. What are the things you really, really love that you definitely want to keep? And then everything else we can sort of, you know, let go of or assess.
Does anyone have any questions for Charlotte? You are welcome to type them in the chat, or if you want to take yourself off mute for a moment and ask your question directly. Maybe you have a certain senior in mind or a certain home situation in mind.
Yeah. Or even for yourself, if you're like struggling with, right? You know, we all kind of go through similar things when it comes to decluttering. I will say something that comes up probably more for seniors is passing things down. Like, oh, but you know, someone in my family might want this. I would ask them because, you know, I think folks of like kind of the millennial and younger generation tend to be more focused on like relationships than stuff, than like physical items. So it's always something to just sort of have a conversation about, right? And if they want it, have them come get it now so you can have the space in your home, right? Rather than needing to store it for someone, you know, along the way. I will say also there's this like, and I participate in this, but there's a concept called like the grand millennial, and they're like millennials who like kind of vintagey or antique things. Like I have a bunch of like teacups and like, I don't know, just other random things. So we do exist. So if your stuff goes to the thrift store, someone will enjoy it if your family doesn't want it. Okay.
I have something from Terrence. Here in Florida, there is an entire industry of renting a storage area for all the things from their old home that don't fit in their smaller home. What process would you recommend?
Don't do that. I mean, so if especially if people are downsizing from, you know, to kind of go into maybe their last home, they don't have basements. Yeah. Oh yeah, that's a good point. If people are going into their last home, you're basically then you're creating a storage area for someone in your family is going to have to go through. I mean, if we're being like, I would assume that's going to be mostly the case. So I always say, go through your stuff before you pay for a place to store things. Like, I just, unless you have a very small home and you like I don't know, but I also don't even dress seasonally. It's amazing how little we actually need in our lives to get by. Like, you know, I've done experiments where I wear 10 pieces of clothes for 10 days and you just like mix and match it. Like, it's kind of incredible how little we actually need. And you don't have basements. Yeah. I mean, people would be shocked if you actually went through all the things that you had, how much room would be available to you. Because the truth of the matter is, like, basements and storage units, for the most part, how often do you actually go to them? How often do you actually go and switch things out and like use the things that are in there, right? And if you say you're saving something for down the road, like I had an ex who had his parents had like furniture in a storage. It was like a bookshelf, right? And like there was a bunch of other stuff, but like weigh out the cost of replacing those items when you actually need them with how much it costs to have a storage unit. They've already moved here and have their storage unit. Yeah. So I would say go through the storage unit and see what you really, especially like I said earlier with basements or storage units, things they haven't looked at in a while, it might be even easier to get rid of. And then, you know, there are professional organizers and professional declutterers that exist everywhere. So if they need support with that, you know, you might want to find in-person folks for some of these, like in your local area, because it can be challenging. This is not something that everyone naturally likes to do or feels good doing, but there are people that exist like me or like others who do that. Only thing I would say is if you're hiring an organizer, make sure they focus on decluttering too, because I've helped someone declutter who they're like, oh yeah, my mother-in-law is a professional organizer. And so they like put everything into bins with labels, but it wasn't actually any stuff that they really wanted. Yeah. Okay. So Terrence also says people tend to keep things like China sets for their kids and the kids don't want it. How to raise this issue. Yeah. So it's up to them if they want to have that conversation now and really deal with the emotions that come up of like, well, this was meaningful to me. What does it mean for it not to be meaningful to my family? I'm a pretty practical person. So I'm like, either you're going to store it until you pass away and they end up donating it or getting rid of it, or you can get rid of it now and have the space. And if they don't want to like have that conversation and have to have that disappointment, that's totally up to them, right? That's their choice. And I think that's fine too. But it's just about, yeah, what are they actually gonna want? And if, you know, for the folks who are storing things, like if they don't need more, if they're fine storing the stuff, fine. But if what they want is more space in their home, invite all the kids down or over or whatever and say, come take what you want, or let me know what you really want me to save for you, and then get their space back. Often that will feel better than the disappointment that might happen from being like, oh, they don't want this, in my experience.
I love the idea of inviting, like if I really wanted to save this thing for my kid, like give it to them now, because you can enjoy giving something away now, especially if it's not something that you're currently using. But also if it isn't something that they actually want, then you can find a new home for that somewhere else instead of making them like deal with whatever. I think that's a really good idea. It is an awkward conversation to have, like, oh, sorry, Mom, I don't actually want your China set. But as service providers, it's not really up to us to facilitate that conversation either. So I would be careful on what kind of boundaries you're putting yourself in around some of those conversations. But reclaim that space now. That's such a good idea. My grandma did something very similar when she was getting ready to downsize. And so she's like, all right, guys, now's your chance. Come and claim what you want, because the rest of it's going to go.
Yes, exactly. And there is a book, I didn't end up reading it, but the concept of it might be helpful. So maybe this might be a book to recommend. And it's called The Art of Swedish Death Cleaning. And it's this process where when folks in Sweden hit around age 60, they slowly start to get rid of their things. And it's literally around this process of, like not leaving it for someone else to have to deal with, right? Of course, some people are just like, yeah, they'll deal with it and that's it. Oh, that's fine too. But some people are precious about their things. Some people aren't. Like I think about my dad. I'm like, all right, one day we're just going to go through all this stuff, right? Like before you're not able to help me with it anymore. Cause I'm his only kid. And he's he's a very practical person. So you can sort of like read the room on that too, right? If they want to store the things until they pass away, then that's totally their right and their option. And they can do that, right? It's all within their choice.
When you go into someone's home, what are maybe three questions that you come back to every time when it comes to getting rid of some of their things?
Yeah. So this is why I especially, upfront ask, what do you want this space to feel like, or what's your goal or intention? One time I didn't do that and it became very difficult because I was with someone who's very indecisive, and I sort of realized, okay, I really need to be asking that question at the beginning, because otherwise it's just like I'm the bad guy trying to see if they should get rid of their stuff, right? So, getting clear on what the goal is, and so then just coming back to that question. So with the example of the person wanting like a space where they could feel peace and productivity, it was like, okay, does this add to that or detract from that? Sometimes it's very specific depending on like the items. A lot of times people will be like, what if I need this one day? And so I borrow a Marie Kondo concept, which is, if you can replace it in less than 20 minutes for less than $20, like maybe you can let it go for those things that you're like, maybe one day I would need this 7th roll of tape or this 3rd white tank top or like whatever. But like, if it's easy to replace, is it more worth it to you to have the space and the peace of mind, right, that comes with that? And it's also just getting rid of clothes that don't fit is just like, and really old clothes, it's like, have things that make you feel good. And if your body changes, go shopping, right? Like that's just something that comes up a lot, with clothes, especially. So these are 3 sort of common things. There's definitely more, but. Oh, another one I will say too is don't just like open a cabinet and look at it and go, oh, I need all this stuff. Like, and not go through it. Like actually go through it, because I, one that I just did, the woman was like, I don't think I need to declutter much. I think I just need a better organizational system. And I was like, okay, well, let's just start with decluttering just to see. And she got rid of so much stuff. She got rid of like 3 boxes of donate. And this was like a small home office, and she only had half of it because she shares it with her husband. And so she got rid of 3 boxes for donations, like 2 bags of recycling, and like a bag of trash. And so, just don't ever assume, like when you look at your closet and go, I like all this stuff, always take everything out and actually go through it one at a time, because you will be shocked. Like she had collections of like greeting cards, like to send, right, for different occasions. And we went through each one, and she got rid of like probably over half of them because she didn't like them anymore. She like stocked up on them forever ago, and she's like, these aren't cute anymore. I don't like them. And we recycled them, or maybe we donated them.
Talk a little bit more about organizing. So we've decluttered, we've taken some of the stuff out. What are some good ways to structure optimal organization?
Yeah. So one, like, don't get trapped into the idea of like where things have to go, right? Like, oh, this is a pantry, so I have to put food in it. Well, maybe I don't cook very much. So I have like one cabinet where I have food. And then my pantry is used for like my, pet accoutrement and my tools, right? And things like that. So really find a system that works for you. Another tip I would say is to put the things that you use least on the highest shelf or cabinet, right? Like put the things you actually use closest to like where you can reach it. And try to make everything visible. This is where decluttering really helps, because if you just have stacks on things, you're not going to see it. And if things you don't see, you don't use, right? So if you have like 20 mugs and half of them are way back in a deep cabinet, you're likely never going to use those ones that are in the back, right? Because who like actually goes and digs out a specific mug that they want to use? Maybe some people do, but likely you probably just cycle the same ones over and over again, week to week. So like realize that and say, maybe there's a special occasion where I might need a few extra, but other than that, maybe let me just keep the ones that are my absolute favorite. Any other like more specific organizing questions? I feel like I have more, but it just depends on what specifically we're organizing.
Anyone have a specific organizing question? You can type it in the chat, or you can turn off your microphone or turn on your microphone. I think about.
Actually, I have a question.
Yeah.
Sorry, it was just easier than typing it.
Mm-hmm.
So for people like me that have grown children,
mm-hmm.
and their former bedrooms are now their storage unit, do you have a drop dead date of, hey, you got to get this stuff out? Is that the best way to do it? Just say, hey, I want to make your room my office, because I don't have an office because couldn't do it when you guys were living here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So is that your tactic? I'm looking for tactics because I have 2 storage units in my house.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm also a part of that I do in my life coaching is around boundary setting. So I think that's a great idea, right? Like maybe be reasonable about like, you don't have to get it done tomorrow, but what I find too with setting boundaries like that is like, okay, so it's July. By the end of this summer, right? Like I want all of your stuff out or I'm going to donate it. That's what I would do. I would even add like I'll assume you don't want it and I'll donate it if you don't come and go through it and get your stuff. And from the other end of things, my parents are divorced. So I had stuff in my apartments, I had stuff in each of their houses. And it was actually really nice to be able to have all of my stuff under one roof and know what I had. And a lot of those things that I did store there, again, I ended up just getting rid of, right? And like not realizing because they'll make it work. So I think that's a great idea of like, okay. And maybe you can even say, if you want to come over on this one weekend, we'll have dinner or we'll do whatever, to try to make it more of an event. I have a friend who has 3 siblings. So it's him and 3 sisters. And they all want to they're kind of all over the country, but they all want to get together this fall to like go through the stuff in their parents' house and like get rid of things so that the parents can like downsize one day if they want to or things like that. Cause now they're empty nesters. So I think that's a great idea and definitely one that everyone's clients could use as well. Because the point is to have a relationship with you, not for you to store their stuff. Right?
That's the hope, right?
Yeah.
Anyone else have a last question for Charlotte? About you personally, someone in your life?
I mean, I've got 1,000 questions, but they're going to be along the same line. I have an extensive LP collection, which, and I even had a piece of furniture made to hold them.
Yeah.
Well, and I also have an extensive cassette collection from the days. Well,
Do you listen to them?
Well, I can't even buy a cassette player anymore. I mean, you can't buy a cassette player.
So you don't have a way to listen to them?
Correct. And
I would get rid of them.
And I do have a phonograph, and it is hooked up. And it's just a question of going and getting the records and bringing them down to the phonograph and playing them and then putting them back.
Yeah.
So, in my mind, I'm like, all right, this is a perfect thing to say, ask the girl. I got 2 girls. Ask the girls, okay, who wants my records? And you just take them all. Yeah. And although I had very few takers for the Princess Di wedding album.
Yeah.
But just things like that. Obviously I'm going to have to bite the bullet on the cassettes.
Yeah. Those I would, unless there's cassettes don't even really have artwork in them, do they? Like CDs used to have pamphlets or whatever. So say there was a couple of your favorites and you wanted to keep a couple of that, right? For sentimental. But yeah, if you don't have a way to play them, you're not enjoying them, they're just sitting there gathering dust. I would, there might be a way to recycle cassettes potentially, but my dad has VHS tapes still, and he has my dad's an interesting guy. He has garbage picked so many VCRs and knows how to fix them. So he actually still watches his VHS tapes. So if it was a situation like that where you could actually actively enjoy them, I would say sure. But if you can't even enjoy them, then yeah, I would let them go. And your LPs, if you listen to them, great, keep them. But I would still go through them and ask yourself, how many did I just collect over the years that maybe I don't even really like listening to anymore? Because if you have, with things like that, if you have 10 to 20 records or LPs that you actually really like, then they're small, it's a small enough amount that you could maybe store them right by the record player. And so you'd be more likely to, on a random evening, just put on a record. That's another beauty of decluttering, is you actually use what's left over so much more because you have the space to store it right where you would use it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, those are good questions.
Oh, and then I also have 3 sets of china, but that's another story.
Well, and these are the things too, when it comes to china and that stuff that's fancy, we say for a fancy occasion, I just started saying screw it. I'm just going to use these every day. Why am I saving? I don't have fancy dinner parties. Maybe some people do, but use your beautiful glasses, use your beautiful china every day. And yeah, if it chips or breaks, fine, but at least you're using it. It's not just sitting in a cabinet, again, gathering dust, and then stop. In life, I just think we don't need to reserve things for special occasions. Make every day a special occasion.
Well, and we tried that. So we've got our own set of china that we got when we got married. We have our everyday china, which is fine. Okay. And we like both of those and we use them. Then we got 2 sets of china from my in-laws, and frankly, they're ugly.
Yeah, you hate them. Yeah.
and we tried to give them to the girls, and even the girls wouldn't take them.
Yeah.
But
that's a perfect candidate for a donation.
But I've got a spouse that's extremely sentimental. And it's oh, those are mom and dad's. I'm like, yeah, but not even dad used them. I mean, come on.
Yeah. So when it comes to partners and other folks, I do say always focus on decluttering, whatever your own stuff is. And I always recommend that, partners have each have their own spaces. So maybe it's okay, if you really want to keep these things, have it in your space, or have it in, this cabinet is for whatever you want to keep, and I'm just never going to open it. Right. But once that cabinet gets full, that cabinet is full, and so obviously that would be a shared conversation that you would have with your spouse. But, there are things like that too, because at the end of the day, yeah, we can't control anyone else or the way that they would keep or get rid of things, because they probably think we keep things that are silly to them and vice versa. Right. So how can you, have a little bit of maybe separation between those things. Right. And eventually, what happens sometimes is if you go through your own stuff, your partner gets really inspired to go through their stuff. I had a client once who her girlfriend she's like, I'm fine, but my girlfriend, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, okay, well, is there a space in the house that's just yours? And she had one room that was her stuff. And I said, okay, let's start with that. And we went through, we did the whole room. And then the next day she like messaged me. She's like, my girlfriend wants me to help her declutter now. And I was like, awesome. Like, that's amazing. So it doesn't happen every time, but.
And I tried that because we had clothes in our attic that we had when we were working up in New York City in the 80s. So I went up and I got rid of all my suits and my jackets that had puffy shoulders and all those, fashion faux pas that, as we look back on them. And I cleared the whole thing out and I said, okay, the rest is yours. And hoping for that kind of revelation.
Yeah.
And she went up and kind of looked at it and goes, no, I'm good with that. No.
And sometimes that's how it is. Like I said, you can't, kids are a different matter, right? Because it's your space. But sometimes that's just how it is. So it is, how can we contain it so that you can have your piece, right? Separate closets or separate parts of the closets or things like that. But yeah, sometimes you just gotta learn how to maintain your own peace, even with someone else's clutter and decisions, which is part of life.
I just chalked it up to pick your battles.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. And maybe one day, you never know, but don't hold your breath. Learn to live your life anyway. But yeah, those are great questions. Love them.
Thank you, Charlotte. We're getting towards the end of our hour. Thank you so much for coming and answering our questions around decluttering, whether it's our stuff or our senior stuff. It's been really great having you. Anything else you want to share before we wrap this up?
No, I'll just share in the chat just my Instagram, just for you folks if you want to follow along. And then I am going to offer, if anyone wants to try the virtual decluttering subscription for themselves or for anyone else, you feel free to share this code. But I'll send a link in the chat as well as a code for half off your first month if you want to give that a try.
Great. And if you want to send those to me as an email as well, I can make sure that they get into the follow-up recording for everybody.
Awesome. I will do that right now. Thank you so much for having me. I could talk about this stuff forever. It's my favorite.
All right. Have a good one, Charlotte. Thanks, everyone, for coming today.
Bye, everyone.
Have a good day.